AI is incredible. It can teach you how to fry an egg and even write a poem, pirate style. Yarr! But it knows nothing about your work. Slackbot is different. It doesn't just know the facts. It knows your schedule. It can turn a brainstorm into a brief. And it doesn't need to be taught. Because Slackbot isn't just another AI. It's AI that knows your work as well as you do. Visit slack.com/meet Slackbot to learn more.
And now, your daily dose of debate, breaking news, and uncensored views. This is the Michael Medved Show.
And another great day in this greatest nation on God's green earth. A great day with some, maybe not great news, but certainly positive news. There is now at least some agreement as to whether there is contact between the United States of America and the so-called Islamic Republic of Iran. An Iranian source told CNN today that there had been outreach between the United States and Tehran and that Iran is willing to listen to sustainable proposals to end the war. This is incredible, though. I mean, we have gone from a situation as, okay, when is the United States going to be finished with achieving our goals? And we'll get to that in a moment, what our goals really are. And now we have gotten to when will Iran be willing to put an end to the war? Is that the key question on the table? We'll be talking about that with Niall Stanage later in the show, who is a veteran writer for The Hill and somebody who has dug fairly deeply into what a potential deal with Iran might look like. We are also going to be talking about the crisis at American airports. Is the answer to everything that's going on and the long lines and the difficulties that people have, is that answer really ICE? And speaking of ICE, there is more scandal, believe it or not, after the fact about Kristi Noem and the way that she spent the public's money and handled her job as the Homeland Security Secretary. And the new Homeland Security Secretary, confirmed by the Senate with a fairly comfortable margin, Markwayne Mullin. He is the man. What is it that he did that impressed his colleagues enough to get him confirmed? We will get to that also. And President Trump has found somebody else to credit or to blame for the war with Iran. Who is it? Which one of his dedicated acolytes does he want to single out as responsible for this war? We will get to that as well on the Medved Show. Meanwhile, the big news that indicates that maybe, just maybe, we're getting close to finishing the war, which is almost now a month old, that this war has been going on. But CNN is reporting that an Iranian source told them today that there had been outreach between the United States and Tehran, and that Iran is willing to listen to, quote, sustainable proposals to end the war. There has been outreach between the United States and Iran initiated by Washington in recent days, but nothing has reached the level of full-on negotiations, the source said. So, okay, we're not really close to a settlement, but we're close to beginning negotiations for a settlement. Messages have been received. This is the Iranian statement. Messages have been received through various intermediaries to scope out whether an agreement to end the war can be reached. The proposals being looked at are aimed not merely at achieving a ceasefire, but a concrete agreement to end the conflict between the U.S. and Iran. They added, without going into further detail, the source from Iran refused to comment on U.S. President Donald Trump's public statements on the negotiations and emphasized that Iran's position has always been clear that Tehran is ready to consider any viable proposal. They do not believe that the demand for unconditional surrender, which characterized Trump's position earlier in this conflict, that is a sustainable or viable proposal. Meanwhile, on the other conflict that is afflicting Americans and having a real impact on the way that we live, Senate Republicans this Tuesday have a new sense of optimism for getting a deal to reopen the Department of Homeland Security following a Monday evening meeting with President Trump. Okay, good news. Trump appears to have backed off of his former insistence that efforts to reopen the Department of Homeland Security, which has been without funding for more than a month, be tied to Democrats agreeing to pass the Save America Act. And SAVE, again, counts for safeguarding American voter eligibility. In other words, trying to pretend that this particular piece of legislation, which has all kinds of add-ins that Trump insists upon or had been insisting upon, that this is actually protecting America's right to vote, when the truth is that it would make it harder for some 20 million people who send in their ballots by mail and who do follow a different kind of state setup than President Trump approves, makes those rights to vote not safeguarded at all, but actually vitiated and taken away. The Democrats did not agree and will not agree to pass the Save America Act, the voting requirements bill currently before the Senate. The president's demand that the legislation be passed before any shutdown agreement could be reached had added a significant hurdle to the funding talks, given broad Democratic opposition to the bill. The Hill's Alexander Bolton reports that Senate Republicans now believe Trump is willing to accept a potential deal, not just with Iran, but with Democrats, in which funding for DHS would be split into two pieces of legislation. A Senate Republican source familiar with the discussion said Trump is willing to separate funding for enforcement and removal operations from the DHS appropriations bill to get enough Democratic support. The GOP would then look to pass additional money for U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, removal process through reconciliation, allowing it to pass without Democratic votes. And then there is this report from CBS. The Trump administration has now deployed ICE and other Homeland Security agents to 14 of the nation's airports. That's happened yesterday, to help shuttle passengers through overcrowded TSA checkpoints. In one airport, the security line wait time was up to 6 hours. That can basically ruin anyone's business trip or vacation or trip to visit a seriously ill relative. Whatever you're doing, 6 hours waiting at security checkpoints at major airports is a nightmare. The agents who have been dispatched, the ICE agents, are filling in for TSA officers in some places due to mass call-outs during the partial government shutdown that is keeping the officers from receiving their paychecks. By the way, there was an interesting news story, and I don't know if anyone is taking it seriously because of the source, but Elon Musk has offered to pay out of his own funds, and of course, as the world's richest man, he has plenty of them, to pay some of the TSA personnel who have not been getting paid. More than 400 TSA officers, nearly 12% of all TSA officers who were scheduled to work, called out and on Sunday, which is the most since the start of the partial shutdown. So what happens next on all these fronts? We'll try to probe that and more as we continue on the Michael Medved Show.
Baseball is back, and the first pitch is on Netflix. The New York Yankees, led by seven-time All-Star Aaron Judge, head to the San Francisco Bay to take on Rafael Devers' San Francisco Giants. This season kicks off with one exclusive opening night game. Watch MLB Opening Night, the New York Yankees versus the San Francisco Giants, live on Netflix. Tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific.
And part of what leads to this sense that I think increasingly Americans have, which is that everything is a mess, nothing is working, things are difficult. The optimism that surrounded the beginning of our strike against Iran, that seems to have largely dissipated. We're now hoping for an off-ramp and for some kind of negotiated settlement that is going to fall far short of what would be an unconditional surrender by our adversaries. Meanwhile, there is the problem with the TSA officers. More than 3,400 TSA officers, nearly 12% of all personnel who were scheduled to work, called out on Sunday, which is the most since the start of the partial shutdown. Amid severe staffing shortages, some travelers navigating the George Bush International Airport in Houston dealt with 6-hour wait times. 6-hour wait times. Lines were snaked up 3 floors, starting in the basement's subway corridor, before passing through the baggage claim area. It sounds like a nightmare. And how many people missed flights or were unable to leave anywhere near on time, even for life and death needs for travel, which do occur. Meanwhile, there is the battle of the polls. CBS News poll was released this weekend. It found that 92% of MAGA Republicans approve of the military action against Iran. Back in January, Trump boasted, MAGA is me, MAGA loves everything I do, and I love everything I do too. Well, that's good. The Washington Post notes that there, other than a few exceptions, he loves everything he does, such as the release of the Justice Department's Jeffrey Epstein files. That has been the case. And there is this on CNN, Harry Enton, who covers their data and their polling information. There's a new CNN poll that shows that the only way that Republicans can win, given the gender gap in this country, is winning overwhelming support from male voters. And male voters are abandoning Donald Trump. Take a look here. This gives the game away. Okay, Trump's standing with men. In November of 2024, he beat Kamala Harris among men by 13 points. By 13 points. But look at where he is now on his net approval rating. Down he goes, says Harry Enton. It's a 20-point shift away from Donald Trump on the part of men. He is now 7 points underwater at this particular point among men. And Harry Enton says, I think it is very difficult for Republicans to do well in this midterm cycle. If Donald Trump is underwater with men, as my uncle once wrote, where the boys are, where the men are, they are underwater when it comes to Donald John Trump. And the answer of some Republicans will be to localize the race, because nobody's going to be seeing a ballot that has Trump's name on it. His name is not on the ballot anywhere. You're going to see the race between, James Tallarico and maybe John Cornyn, or it could be Ken Paxton, but that's a nightmare for Republicans anyway. Meanwhile, the dispatch of the Homeland Security agents, all of this is competing for attention with the effort to find what is called an off-ramp for the war in Iran. And CNN offered, I think, a useful summary about what each side is pushing for with the negotiations now being confirmed between the United States and Iran. What the United States wants, it says, is the United States remains unclear in its immediate goals, which is part of the problem. But it has for decades sought to change Iran's behavior and is seeking to extract stringent guarantees, how much are they worth, that the Islamic Republic will neither pursue a nuclear weapons program nor continue backing proxies, terrorist proxies, that target Israel. Washington also aims to impose strict limits on Iran's ballistic missile program, while demonstrating sufficient military power to deter future Iranian leaders from challenging the regional order. Not much order in that region of the world. What is it that Iran wants? Iran, according to CNN, Iran is seeking to impose a seismic shift in the regional status quo while guaranteeing its own survival. For years, it has watched Gulf Arab states prosper under the U.S. security umbrella, while the Islamic Republic endured crippling sanctions. From that perspective, Tehran aims to leverage its control over the critical Strait of Hormuz, demand war reparations, which they will never get, and of course should never get, and to secure the lifting of sanctions, all while inflicting, economic and strategic global pain to demonstrate how costly any future conflict with Iran could become. And finally, what is Israel looking for? Israel is seeking to topple the Iranian regime, which for half a century has designated Israel as its primary global enemy and said that their purpose is to excise Israel, get rid of it in the region like a poisonous cancer. Under Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel has also made clear its ambition to reshape the Middle East by neutralizing all potential threats to its security, including Iran's backed regional proxies like Hamas and Hezbollah. It has backed Iranian monarchists deposed by the 1979 Islamic Revolution, infiltrated the country, and Israel sees this war as a culmination of a process that started after Israel was attacked by Hamas in a genocidal attack on October 7th, 2023, to which it began to eliminate its primary regional threats. Meanwhile, skepticism on the part of the Supreme Court toward mail-in voting, we will get to that story and more coming up on The Medved Show.
Whether you bond over streaming binge-worthy videos, watching sports recaps, video gaming, or by unplugging altogether, the 2026 Lincoln Nautilus Hybrid helps keep you connected throughout your journey. Learn more at Lincoln.com. Available connectivity features and functionality vary by model. Package pricing, trials, and term lengths vary by model. Video streaming and games are only available while parked.
And on the Michael Medved Show, The Hill has a headline called Mail-in Skepticism. And the point of that headline is that a majority of the Supreme Court yesterday appeared skeptical of allowing states to count mail-in ballots that are received after the polls have closed on Election Day. That's even if those ballots were mailed days, even weeks before, and have the postmark showing they were filled out and mailed long before Election Day. The question is, should they be counted with a grace period that most states that do mail-in ballots at all have that grace period? The could see potentially, says the Hill, signal a notable change ahead of the midterm elections. The case centers on Mississippi, a Republican state that passed a voting law that allows a 5-day grace period for ballots received after the polls close, as long as those ballots are postmarked by Election Day, which seems so entirely reasonable. Why are we supposed to punish people for not submitting their ballot early? Because the only way to guarantee that the ballot actually arrives by Election Day is to make sure that you put it in the mail before Election Day. So the case centers on Mississippi's voting law that allows a 5-day grace period for ballots received after polls close, as long as they're postmarked by Election Day. The Republican National Committee led a challenge to the statute, arguing that federal law permits only one Election Day. Why is the Republican National Committee taking up this cause? Because they believe, and this is not even necessarily true, but there's a general belief that Republicans do a better job of mailing ballots in on time, that most of the ballots that arrive later or later in the process are from Democrats. So this would be a way of basically getting an edge on Democrats by disqualifying any votes that arrived in the mail after Election Day. Mississippi appealed a lower court ruling that found federal law preempts the statute, but several conservative justices expressed concern that counting ballots late could undermine faith in elections. Brett Kavanaugh, for instance, said yesterday, if the apparent winner the morning after the election ends up losing due to late arriving ballots, charges of a rigged election could explode. Is that what happened with President Trump in 2020? No. The edge for Joe Biden was fairly consistent since the voting process began. And it was only at the very end of the night on Election Day that Trump had advantages in some states that he lost when the voting counting was completed. If the court strikes down Mississippi's law, it could also impact the more than a dozen other states, plus the District of Columbia, that allow for a grace period for receiving ballots. Nearly 30 states also accept military and overseas ballots received after Election Day. Okay, so we are giving people an advantage in voting about their ballots coming in on time if they are living abroad or they are on vacation abroad. That seems very strange. In other words, if you're vacationing in Spain or you're vacationing in Italy or you're vacationing in Japan, you can then get your ballot in after Election Day and it'll still be counted. But if you're vacationing in a different state or you're here in the United States at all, then your ballot would have to arrive, not just be postmarked before Election Day. Okay, this is the way that the debate yesterday, the oral arguments on this question about a grace period for mailing in ballots was covered on Fox News about the election law. Clip 16.
Independence Day, birthday, and election day. And they're all particular days. So if we start with that, if I have nothing more to look at than the phrase election day, I think this is the day in which everything is going to take place.
But Justice Kagan questioned the impact of that logic on practices like early voting.
It seems to me it's a rule that prevents early voting because you're basically saying there are two things that have to happen, and they have to happen on election day.
Meaning the casting of the vote and the receipt of that vote. But attorney Paul Clement, representing the RNC, said the argument is that the process be consummated or completed by Election Day. A number of the justices also raised the issue of the potential for the appearance of fraud when votes arrive and are counted after Election Day. And there wind up being shifts in vote totals and how that may impact public confidence.
Okay, that question about public confidence. There has been so much damage done to public confidence and our whole election procedures by President Trump and so many of his followers holding on to this notion of a stolen election. There are still some polling says even a majority of self-described MAGA Republicans who believe that President Trump actually won the election of 2020 and should have been inaugurated as president then. And it's something that greatly undermines the general confidence in the whole process that we have of complicated election processes that we're going to see illustrated in determining the control of Congress with the upcoming midterm elections. There was an event that President Trump participated in Memphis, Tennessee. And I don't just mean his well-advertised first visit ever to Graceland, to the home of Elvis Presley. And just for the record, I've been to Graceland, and it's really completely fascinating, because Elvis is such a huge figure in popular culture. And his house is surprisingly upper middle class. It is not as lavish as you'd expect for someone who was such an icon for so many years. And the whole experience of Trump at Graceland was part of a visit that he made to Memphis, Tennessee, and speeches he delivered under the heading, Make America Safe Again. And that Make America Safe Again is something that apparently Joe Biden accomplished. The Wall Street Journal, which is not a Biden-supporting rag, the Wall Street Journal had a headline, Big Crime Drop Has Many Explanations. Tougher policing, less alcohol use, and more people in prison cited in historic fall. They write, amid all the turmoil in the world, one decidedly positive trend stands out. Crime in the United States is way down. That good news deserves more attention, which we'll give it in this greatest nation on the Michael Medved Show.
Instagram teen accounts have automatic protections for what teens see and who can contact them, plus time management tools. And Instagram will continue adding built-in safety features to help create age-appropriate experiences. Learn more about teen accounts and Instagram's ongoing work to protect teens online at instagram.com/teen accounts.
And on the Michael Medved Show, President Trump is no longer claiming full credit for the war against Iran. Why not? Well, because the war has ended up being much more complicated, much more difficult, much less a walkover than people had expected. After our 12-day experience bombing Iran in January, the Operation Midnight Hammer, that was a quick, almost immediate success. This has been more difficult, and it shows the fact that Iran has all kinds of ways to respond to American attack, including closing the Strait of Hormuz, which has a devastating impact on the world economy, on gas prices here in the United States, and the kind of setback that every American can feel. So President Trump went out of his way not to claim credit solely for the war, but to say that his Secretary of War, as he would style himself, Pete Hegseth, was really the first guy to advocate for going to war against Iran. President Trump said this at a cabinet meeting in Washington, D.C. Here is the president, clip 18.
And then, unfortunately, I called Pete, I called General Kane, I called a lot of our great people. We have great people. And I said, let's talk. We got a problem in the Middle East. We have a country known as Iran that for 47 years has been just a purveyor of terror. And they're very close to having a nuclear weapon. We can keep going and get that 50,000 up to 55 and 60 is no end. Or we can take a stop and make a little journey into the Middle East and eliminate a big problem. And Pete, I think you were the first one to speak up. And you said, let's do it, because you can't let them have a nuclear weapon. So we are now having really good discussions. They started last night, a little bit, the night before that.
Okay, you were the first one to advocate for it. This during the president's speech in Memphis, actually. But he also took a page out of the playbook of his sometime buddy, Vladimir Putin. You notice that Putin has been conducting this devastating war, and devastating both to Russia and to Ukraine, against Ukraine. And one of the problems for Putin is he's never been willing to call it a war. He calls it a military operation. And all of a sudden, Trump began to echo that designation. This is clip 20.
Democrats are putting our country at great risk during this period of time, a period that they call a war. They call it a war. We call it a military operation.
Okay, why? It is a war, but I guess you can win or lose a war. Do you win or lose a military operation, or is that just like an exercise? And Stephen Miller, the presidential advisor who has helped to devise his whole plan for mass deportation of non-citizen Americans. The entire Stephen Miller and Kash Patel, the director of the FBI, were particularly obsequious in terms of their response to President Trump. And after Miller's fawning of the president, you'll hear Trump turning to Kash Patel and asking if he could top Stephen Miller in terms of praise for President Trump. And you'll hear Kash Patel trying his level best. Stephen Miller and Kash Patel on the achievements and the excellence of the MAGA president. This is clip 19.
The work that President Trump is doing, not only in Memphis, not only in Washington, D.C., but all over the country, ultimately, it will save and is saving tens of thousands of American lives. It is, I'll use that word again, what President Trump has done on border security and public safety is a national miracle that will be studied not only for generations, but for centuries to come. Thank you, President Trump.
Thank you, Steve. So, Kash, see if you can top that. I don't know. That's a tough one, Kash.
That is tough. I'm reminded that Americans exist to protect this country day in and day out, and they've done it like we've done it here. But what we didn't have was you. We didn't have a commander-in-chief who backed the blue, who resourced the blue, who funded the military, who did whatever it takes to safeguard every single life. And here in Memphis, Tennessee, you have put on a show for the world. You have allowed us to go out there and capture gangbangers, rapists, murderers, drug dealers at record historic levels. And for me, a first-generation Indian-American kid whose parents fled a genocide in East Africa to become the 9th director of the FBI, I'm living the wildest dream you could possibly imagine, sir.
Living the wildest dream he could possibly imagine. That includes going to the locker room with the victorious gold medal winning U.S. Hockey team in the Winter Olympics. This is the idea of President Trump talking about, and his associates talking about, the big crime drop, which I had mentioned just a little bit earlier in this show. The Wall Street Journal article says the homicide rate fell last year to at least a 125-year low based on projected final year data, a milestone President Trump hailed last month in his State of the Union address. Continuing drops in a range of other reported crimes, such as robbery and theft, point to a public safety rebound after the upheaval spurred by the COVID-19 pandemic. Overall, most crimes are lower than they were pre-pandemic, said Ernesto Lopez, a senior research specialist with the Nonpartisan Council on Criminal Justice and co-author of a recent report on crime trends. The findings are based on data for a few dozen big cities. And one of the bases that they show for this reduction in crime is young people spending more time alone is also a possible factor. But the point about all this is it's not a drop in crime that began all of a sudden when Trump was inaugurated. It was a drop and a decline in crime that had actually begun toward the end of the pandemic in the Biden campaign, during the Biden presidency, not the Biden campaign. The Biden campaign was just a nightmare and a mess. And the idea that all of a sudden you have people like Stephen Miller saying that the decline in crime has been because of the roundup of immigrants, which is basically what he's saying, is to perpetuate this myth that people who are immigrants to the United States are more likely to commit serious crimes, particularly violent crimes, than people who were born and raised here. That's not true. The rate of crime for people, including people who are undocumented immigrants, is lower than the rate of crime for native-born Americans, and for one simple reason. They are afraid of getting into trouble and losing their residency here in the United States and their ability to function here in the United States. And again, it's one of those issues that it's uncomfortable to talk about because it is very difficult to say to people who have suffered from crime, regardless of the source or the immigration status of the people committing the crime, to say that, well, your crime is not as serious as others because the person committing that crime was native born? Really? We will get to more on this and what it is that Americans consider moral and immoral. A fascinating new poll from the Pew people, which says a lot about differences between young and old in this greatest nation on God's green earth.